Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
You're listening to Bloomberg Businessweek with Massar and Tim Stenovec on Bloomberg Radio.
There's certainly been a story that has been on our mind, and that is the GLP-1 drugs that went Hollywood this past weekend. And yes, it was definitely in Jimmy Kimmel's opening monologue. It was also an advertiser during the live broadcast. Check it out.
Some people have been using medicine never meant for them. For the smaller dress or tux. For a big night. But that's not the point. People whose health is affected by obesity are the reason we work on these medications. It matters who gets them.
That was an ad.
Yeah.
During
the Oscars. I didn't see the whole ad, Carol, because I didn't watch the Oscars. Which one? Who was it for? Was it for
it's interesting
Lily or was it for Novo? Do you know, Madison?
It was Lily. It
was Lily, okay.
But it was interesting how they end because they talk about it matters who gets them, and more people are getting these drugs.
But that was so on point for the audience of that night. Like that was
as
tailor-made.
Jimmy Kimmel pointed out.
I'm like out of my element here because I didn't actually watch. You put it on DVR, so you can send it over to me.
Come over and have some pizza.
Yeah,
right?
4 hours of it. Increasingly, more and more people are getting them, though. Just check out Novo Holdings. It's the shareholder that controls Novo Nordisk. Saw its income and investment returns surge tenfold last year as the drug maker's sales of obesity medicine soared.
Yeah, and more are likely to come in terms of users. Medicare may soon be required to cover the blockbuster weight loss drug Wegovy for heart disease patients with obesity after U.S. regulators approved an expanded label last week. We've been talking about this with our own Madison Muller about the spreading use of these drugs in particular. She joins us here in studio.
Hey.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. I mean, another day, another story about this.
Yep. I was at a luncheon today with Dave Ricks, the CEO of Eli Lilly.
Talk
He
a
was
little bit
interviewed by
about that.
Bloomberg's Carolyn Gage. So it was very interesting.
Talk to us about that, right?
Yeah.
That was at the New York Economic Club?
Yep. Yeah.
So tell us let's start there and what jumped out for you in that conversation.
So, I mean, he talked a little bit about Lilly's whole strategy behind this new marketing push that, we opened with in talking about the Oscars and all of the off-label use. And it's interesting for a pharma company to take this position, but we were talking a little bit about how it's still, they're still running ads during the Oscars. And so there's still kind of that association with the Oscars, with Hollywood and with Lilly. The funny thing to me is that last year when these weight loss drugs were talked about at the Oscars, they talked about Ozempic. They weren't talking about Lilly's drugs. They were talking about Novo's. So Lilly's still trying to get its name out there, which we've talked about is they're still trying to catch up to Novo Nordisk. So it's kind of funny. Novo didn't advertise at all during the Oscars.
I mean, I think after more than a year ago, Madison, there was an article in the New York Times as the trend, I don't want to call it a trend, but as people learn more and more about it, where they said on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, people are referring to it as, vitamin O,
right.
Vitamin Ozempic.
Right.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's the use case, I think, has changed I would say the awareness about the use case has changed quite a bit in recent months.
Yeah. And the drug makers definitely are behind some of that. I scroll through my LinkedIn feed and I'm I don't know if it's because I'm talking about these drugs all the time and the algorithm's picking up on that, but it's Novo and then it's Lilly and it's these advertisements that are not your typical drug ads. They're awareness campaigns. They're education around the fact that obesity is a disease or that these GLP-1 drugs are diabetes drugs and obesity drugs and they're not meant for people that are just trying to lose 5 pounds before vacation.
Well, help me out this because it's not unusual, right, Madison, for a drug company to look for more uses of a specific medication. But we've also talked with you about the potential for these medications to deal with so much that ails individuals and maybe to really lead a much healthier life. So I'm trying to understand the balance between marketing push to get more usage out there versus this could really be a game changer in healthcare.
Right. And that's a good point. I think that the drug companies are trying to really sharpen the idea that there are potentially many uses, but the drug shouldn't be used just off-label for cosmetic purposes. They have real, tangible health benefits, and that's what they're pushing for because that's the important thing for insurance coverage. And that's what we're seeing with Medicare now, which doesn't cover obesity drugs, doesn't cover weight loss drugs, but they're currently reviewing this new FDA decision to expand the label into heart benefits because they might need to cover that heart label and heart indication for certain patients, and so that's sort of what's under discussion right now.
There's been some criticism that I've seen online, kind of making its way, like bubbling up through Twitter, about the idea of quote unquote taxpayers paying for this medication. We also have interviewed treasurers of states in the past that are concerned about the cost of these medications. How has the conversation shifted about, okay, if we are going to tackle obesity, how can we tackle it in a way before people get to the point where, like, I'm what I'm saying is like our food system, access to fresh foods, those sorts of things that aren't necessarily
time to exercise.
Yeah, but it's so much more than that,
agreed,
right?
Agreed.
And because there are countries in the world where this is not as big of an issue as is the United States, and we have processed foods are different here. Talk to me about that conversation that's happening.
I mean, it's interesting, and more states, I think, are like grappling with these costs now of covering these drugs, which we've talked about. And something that was interesting in this, when we were talking about Medicare last week and this decision with the FDA is, like, they're like, okay, now that the drug is actually approved for heart indications, we can work that, or Novo Nordisk will be able to work that into conversations with payers, and like that will actually factor into the conversation now around cost estimates and cost benefit analysis, things like that. And I think now also we're seeing states come in and try to, state health plans at least, and you're talking about treasurers, and like they're like, what else can we do to blunt the costs of this? Are there other, programs or requirements that we can put into place, whether that's like nutrition counseling alongside? So they're trying to figure out what is going to be the path forward for this, but I don't think that they've reached a conclusion.
The cost analysis is really interesting because you think about, all right, what if you have to have open heart surgery or something? Like, what's the cost of that? And then whatever recuperation, or versus having to maybe take this medication, an expensive one, for the rest of your life.
Right. And it's interesting. We've been talking about this on our team a little bit. Like, we don't know if there's a drug that is debuted and come out at this high of a price that is so, I guess widely, it could be prescribed to so many different people. And so like that's a consideration too of, is the price of this drug just too high?
Does it cost this much to make? Like, I don't even know what the process has been, to get here.
When does a generic for this become available?
Well, so Ozempic, I think it's pretty soon, actually, like next few years.
Question.
I think before the end of the decade, potentially.
Because if this formulation, not the use case, but the formulation has been used for years for diabetes, then shouldn't there be some sort of patent expiration coming soon? Right.
And for Ozempic, there is. The other ones are a little bit, more recent, so they still are protected for a bit. Another thing that could help that we've heard actually AstraZeneca talk about, and Lilly and Novo as well, is the weight loss pills, the oral versions that are not as hard to make and could potentially help bring the costs down and just help with supply issues too, be more accessible, especially for people in other countries. They've actually talked about the pills being something that will help, make these drugs more accessible in other countries. So that's an interesting part of this too.
It's crazy. I didn't even think about that. That's really smart, right? Like in terms of,
Thank you, Carol.
You're welcome. No, but you really do think about the generic and how that maybe
that changes everything.
This,
maybe.
Right?
I don't know.
Yeah. For Ozempic, at least. The other ones, and they'll fight tooth and nail. I mean, even like, I'm pretty sure getting the drugs approved in pediatric indications can help extend the patents as well. So they have lots of strategies to protect them as long as they can, but we'll see what happens.
Madison Muller, thank you as always.